All right. So hello. I'm actually, the organisation I'm actually part of is not the Scottish Abortion Campaign. That doesn't exist anymore. But I'm not saying it to be picky, actually, Leslie. I'm saying it because it was a slightly different organisation, and I probably would argue slightly better organisation, but never mind, than the present abortion rights organisation we've got. Abortion rights was basically an amalgamated organization from both the old abortion campaign, with what calls its national one and the Scottish one, and an organization called the Abortion Law Reform Association, which was actually, what it sounds like. It was a group that had existed for a very long time and concentrated on actually changing the law, whereas the National Abortion Campaign and the Scottish Abortion Campaign were basically set up as campaigning groups to keep the law and extend it. I mean, it's if you're interested in talking about organisation, that actually can be an interesting point, but I don't think we're starting there. Said I am a member of the Edinburgh group, and last time I gave a talk like this, I made it very clear that I was basically talking as a member of the Edinburgh group. I still regard myself as such, even though my backup speaker at the moment doesn't appear to have appeared. If it really becomes necessary, I will remind her. But yes, I'm here as a member of Edinburgh Abortion Campaign, and will be talking in that sort of context. The first point, though, that I would like to make is that this is something very unusual about abortion. And a lot of people, I have actually started to realize that a lot of people have forgotten that it is actually technically not legal as such under UK law, and Scottish law and Scottish, Welsh, etc. law. It's basically governed by the law. It's not, well, I'm going to say it's not legal. It's legal only under certain conditions. It's only legal if you go through all the correct procedures. It's not a situation where a woman or anybody else who might be pregnant can actually go and see a medical practitioner and say, I'm pregnant, I want an abortion. It's not like, in that sense, it's not like anything else in any other medical procedure. And that's where a lot of the problems arise, because of all the regulations involved in it. It actually means it is, to a certain extent, is a weak, women are in a, and with apologies to Leslie and others, I will use the word women, but obviously I include anybody else who could get pregnant. Women are actually at a disadvantage. And all those decades of fighting really have been about where the law is. The anti-abortionists try to claw back, use the law to claw back, tighten up, make the rules tighter, harder, fight any attempt to make them looser. And we are fighting the other way. We are now trying to go forward with not just what you might call a reformist agenda, that this needs changing, that needs changing, etc., under the present circumstances. So we keep the law, but we make it easier, but also to have behind there the push that it should be decriminalized. I mean, that's the correct way to put it, to take it out, potentially out of the criminal code and put it back where it belongs as totally a healthcare issue. Okay, and that will be better for everybody. Well, everybody that we're concerned with. And of course, the fact that it is illegal, technically, or not legal, if you like, in itself, means that it very often appears on it increasingly appears on right-wing agendas. And I'm sure people have actually been really aware of what's been happening in Poland, in particular in Britain, and in some of the countries of Latin America, and of course the United States, that the right wing is always there trying to take abortion back. And taking abortion back basically means making it as unavailable as possible, as difficult as possible, and where if they can, illegal. Hence, we end up in a situation where there are women in South America, actually, some South American countries, actually in jail for induced miscarriage. When COVID, though, had an interesting effect both nationally and internationally. In the case of, well, I'm using Scotland, but it actually does apply to England and Wales as well. What happened in Scotland is that the Scottish government, in tandem actually with the UK government governing England, decided, the English and Welsh law decided, and I think I'll leave Goretti to put the Northern Ireland into perspective as well. But they actually went down the road of effectively making early medical abortion more accessible during the COVID crisis. Now, it wasn't a totally unexpected decision. It is something that had actually been rumbling in the background. And this was the idea of what we tend to call telemedicine or telephone consultations. Anybody who's tried to get a medical consultation during COVID probably knows that most of them were by phone. This included, in fact, abortion, even though right from the start, once the aunties realized it was possibly going to happen, they were there saying, no, 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 but it actually came in. So that actually now means for early medical abortion, that's the situation where a woman takes 2 pills, and she used to take the first in the clinic and then she could take the second at home. She can, during the COVID crisis, she could actually take both pills at home after a telephone consultation and with telephone backup. I mean, there's a lot made about, oh, how isolated they must feel, but I can assure you, I know the Scottish Abortion Service, and they're very, very good. There was always somebody there. But to take a slightly extreme example, a woman in Shetland, for instance, before COVID, would actually have to travel to Aberdeen to get her first pill. Overnight boat, pill, back to Shetland. That's gone. She can now do it in Shetland with the backup of actually some very good staff based in Shetland. So for women in rural Scotland, this was probably a real development. And if you actually look across Europe, the countries in Europe went 2 ways. Some went the way that the UK countries did and went easier, bringing in telemedicine, at least temporarily. But others are actually using the COVID crisis almost to drag back and make it, the idea being, this is not an essential operation, you don't need it, put it right down to the bottom of the list. I think for now, I might leave it there and pass on to Goretti, if that's okay.
Thank you very much indeed, Eileen. I'm sure everybody would agree that was most useful and cleared up some topics that are not always understood. Thank you. And so, Goretti, thank you very much indeed for coming to our meeting. Over to you.
Okay, thanks. So, I mean, Eileen has set it up really well because if we'd been doing this meeting 2 years ago, I would be talking about the fact that the big push in Northern Ireland was for decriminalisation, because the same law, the same criminal law applied to abortion right across these islands, actually, both across the island of Ireland and Britain, because of course at one stage we were all part of the United Kingdom. And that was the 1861 Offence Against the Persons Act, which I think does never apply to Scotland, actually, now that I think about it. I think it was some other kind of law in Scotland. But north and south of the border here in Ireland and in England and Wales, the 1861 Act said that abortion was a criminal act. And as Eileen said, the 1967 Act really didn't end that criminalisation. It just said that you could have an abortion under those particular circumstances. The two doctors said, you know, that you had reasons to need an abortion. It took us a fair while here, I have to say, in Ireland. And a lot of the time I'll be talking about north and south. I'll try to make sure that I discriminate between the two, but actually the situation was very, very similar. So for a long time, we didn't really think very much about the 1861 Offence Against the Person Act, except to kind of say, you know, this was a law that was there, you know, before women had the vote, before the light bulb was invented, stuff like that. But we didn't really think of it as having an impact on us, because it didn't really. If we needed an abortion, we traveled to England. And that's where, you know, so some of you may have heard of Imelda, which is this absolutely brilliant group based in kind of agitprop group based in London. And Imelda stands for Ireland Makes England the Legal Destination for Abortion. I mean, Imelda is also quite an Irish Catholic name, but the idea was to kind of say, you know, these bunch of agitprop kind of satirists, you know, we're also pointing out the fact that actually Irish women and pregnant people had abortions week in, week out. 40 women a week used to travel from the north. Another estimated up to 200 a week from the south used to travel to England for abortion. And what that did was it allowed our anti-abortionists, our politicians, and the self-righteous amongst us, basically, to say there is no abortion in Ireland. There's no abortion in Ireland. And there was no abortion in Ireland. You know, women were allowed to die in pregnancy and childbirth. Well, actually, particularly in pregnancy, because of a lack of abortion facilities. Everybody's heard of Savita Halappanavar. They heard of her because her husband and the community, the Indian community that she was part of, couldn't understand. You know, they came from a country where, you know, for all the religious orthodoxies, they were very clear that, you know, a born person, an adult person is worth more than a fetus. So they had no problem in understanding that actually Savita should have been allowed an abortion. But actually there were women dying, you know, maybe 10 or so every year, or perhaps more, because actually we don't know. So basically, if you had cancer and you needed you know, you couldn't get the treatment for the cancer because you were pregnant, you would not be offered an abortion. The doctor, if the doctor was anyway decent, they'd have said, well, of course, you know, some of my patients go to England. Don't say what they go to England for, like, you know, there's just this kind of term, go to England. Some of our patients go to England and then they can get the chemotherapy, as if there's some kind of magic, you know, in traveling between Ireland and England, that actually would, you know, suddenly make you a candidate for chemotherapy. But of course, the real reason is because you'd have an abortion there. So like I say, for years, for decades, from the 67 Act being introduced, the self-righteous, to put them all together, on the island of Ireland pretended that abortion didn't exist here. And the main slogan for us in the north of Ireland was extend the 1967 Act, end the hypocrisy of exporting abortion and extend the 67 Act. All of that changed with the advent of the abortion pills. Now, Eileen talked about them in terms as early medical abortion, and that's like the proper way of describing it. Here we just call them abortion pills because when you're getting them through the post from India, and when you're getting them from the internet, you know, you don't use the kind of more medical terms. So in 2006, Women on Web set up. So there had been a group called Women on Waves, which had been going around places where abortion was like very illegal, and offering abortion on boats. You can imagine that didn't go down very well. If you don't have great sea legs, you know, the last thing you want is to be going onto a boat for any kind of medical procedure. But from 2006, Women on Waves became Women on Web and started to offer abortion pills to any woman, anybody in the world, any woman or pregnant person in the world who needed to get an abortion. And that really transformed the situation. I have to say that it took a while for us to cotton on that Women on Web existed, and it took a while for us to cotton on that this was actually a real game changer. Some of you may know that in 2008, there was an attempt at Westminster to extend the Abortion Act to Northern Ireland when Harriet Harman, and if anybody ever tells you that Harriet Harman is a feminist, you just remember what she did to pregnant people in Northern Ireland in 2008, because she got involved in the worst kind of parliamentary manoeuvre, which The Guardian said was one of the worst parliamentary manoeuvres it had ever seen, where basically they gave in to the Old Boys Club up in Stormont. And actually there was an editorial in The Guardian that said that that's what had happened, that the Old Boys Club, and that was the expression that was used by The Guardian, had been ceded to by Harriet Harman and Gordon Brown. Why? Because the DUP had voted with them on 42-day detention for so-called terrorist suspects, and they had guaranteed the DUP that this would mean that they wouldn't extend the Abortion Act. So in the immediate aftermath of that, we actually started to look around and see, well, what are we going to do? It looks as if the Abortion Act is never going to be extended to Northern Ireland. It turns out we were right, it never was. But you know, we need a new focus. And so for a while, our focus became letting people know that the abortion pills were available, and that meant that you didn't have to travel to England, that actually you could get the pills from Women on Web and self-manage your early medical abortion at home, which is basically just like having a miscarriage. And at that stage, it was available up to 9 weeks. So, you know, it was important to let people know that this, just as soon as they discovered they were pregnant, that they would get the pills immediately, because it takes a while for them to come because they come from India. I mean, they come from Women on Web, but they come via India. So that was sort of from 2008 to 2012. That's pretty much what we did, was like spreading the word about the abortion pills. And we did that for two reasons. One was because it's awful that anybody has to travel for healthcare, that anybody has to, you know, it's very lonely. I've done it myself. It's a very lonely situation to be in. And also, you know, almost anybody who had to travel from the island of Ireland to England for abortion sort of said that they also felt like they were being kind of like exiled from their own country, kind of thing. In that, you know, we're not going to let the likes of you, you know, have any kind of real rights here. So they were important from that point of view, but they were also important, very important in another way, and that was to end the myth that there was no abortion on the island of Ireland. It meant for the first time that we were able to, when politicians got up and said, nobody here wants abortion, we were able to say, well, it's all these women and non-binary people and trans men who are having abortions in their bedrooms here on the island of Ireland. And it actually, it was interesting because in the north, it caused a huge moral panic. And you had the DUP and, you know, the very right-wing kind of politicians, you know, talking about backstreet abortions, describing them as backstreet abortions, whereas actually the pills are very, very safe. They're probably between 5 and 8 times safer than Viagra, which is available over the counter. One of my pet peeves, you can get Viagra over the counter in the UK now, and you can't get abortion pills without doctors giving you prescriptions and everything. Anyway, That's just my my own pet thing. But in the south of Ireland, there was a very different response. In the south of Ireland, there was a response that said, oh my God, what happens if some young girl takes these pills and needs hospital care and doesn't take it up? And so there was a very different discourse north and south. So here in the north, it was clamp down on them, criminalize them, you know, let's use the criminal law to its utmost. And in the south, partly because of the huge, like the mass movement that just exploded onto the streets at the news of Savita Halappanavar's death, but also partly because the south of Ireland has really been debating abortion since 1981. Like it's literally 40 years this year that the proposal to put an anti-amendment abortion into the Constitution was made in the south of Ireland. And since then, like I say, the south of Ireland has been debating. So any of you who saw Three Families on the BBC there last week, and if you didn't see it, you can still get it on the iPlayer, and it is actually worth watching. It's based on true stories from here in Northern Ireland. And that really showed the difference in the approach here in Northern Ireland to the use of abortion pills and the criminalisation of people who use them. Because while in the south, the Director of Public Prosecutions and the police, the guards in the south, the police in the south, made it clear that they would not prosecute anybody who'd used abortion pills. In the north, it was the exact opposite. The Attorney General, who in 2013 had sent a letter to all of the obstetricians and gynecologists in the hospitals here, warning them that were they to provide abortions, even in the case of fatal fetal abnormalities, in other words, when there's no baby going to come home because the baby will be born dead, that even in those cases, were they to provide an abortion, that they face life imprisonment. And that's right, under the 1861 Act, that's what they did. So that letter went around to all of the obstetricians and gynecologists in 2013. And the results of that are seen on that Three Families program, where you know, couples who are very, very happy to be pregnant, delighted to be pregnant, come to their 20-week scan and then discover that in fact, they're facing tragedy, you know, that instead of facing having a baby, they're facing this worst tragedy of their lives. And that certainly helped to kind of get people here really very, very angry. For the first time, we saw people actually speaking out about their experiences of having to travel to England, because it's one thing if you have to travel to England with the sort of stigma of unwanted pregnancy, but to have to travel to England when it's a wanted pregnancy and you're faced with nothing but tragedy, and then you're told that actually you have to leave, you know, your much wanted baby behind in Liverpool, because how are you supposed to carry it with you on the plane home? Or you're told to get a cooler bag and put the remains in the cooler bag, you know, or you're told that, you know, if you want to make sure that in case this is something genetic that's going to happen with other pregnancies, you know, that you're going to need a post-mortem. And you know, then I mean, it's just you can just imagine how awful all of that was. Anyway, so all of that and the criminalization of doctors, the attempt to criminalize doctors who are just really following their basic instincts as doctors, really like, gosh, I don't know how to say this without insulting people, but shall we say, like, riled the more middle class elements that in the past wouldn't have really wanted to touch the question of abortion. But this was actually something that was affecting their families. You know, you'd be really shocked to discover that just from Northern Ireland, where there's only like 2 million of us, there's about 2 people a week have to travel just for reasons of severe fetal anomaly. At the same time as that was happening, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock here, Leslie, don't worry. At the same time as that was happening, the police started to raid activists' homes looking for the abortion pills. On International Women's Day in 2016, it could be 2015, 2016, the years kind of start flowing together, don't they? But I think it was 2016, on International Women's Day, when people were in Belfast City Hall listening to Angela Davis speaking, the police were raiding homes of abortion activists in Belfast looking for pills. Interestingly, there were two of us, myself and a woman called Emma Campbell, who had been on the radio week in, week out saying, yes, we help women get abortion pills. Yes, that's right. Oh, well, if the police are interested, they know where we live. You know, we'd be very happy. We would invite, we wanted a political trial, you know. So, you know, we were saying stuff like that. Like I say, on radio and TV, our homes weren't raided. You know, they raided homes of people who really, like, they didn't have the pills and they weren't going to have the pills. And I think the police knew that. Then the word started to emerge from the courts that actually people were being sentenced were being charged, prosecuted, and found guilty under the 1861 Act, under Section 58, which is Section 58 is when you cause actually cause a miscarriage, cause an abortion. So in January of 2016, the word emerged that a 19-year-old girl whose flatmates, if you don't mind, had reported her to the cops, that she pled guilty. And the judge was absolutely brilliant. Actually, our judges turned out to be dead class conscious here in Northern Ireland. And the judge pointed out that had she had the money to go to England, that she wouldn't have been before the court. And that it was wrong, that said that it was wrong that judges were being asked to implement laws, you know, that belonged 150 years before. And he gave her a suspended sentence. She could have got life imprisonment. Then in July of that year, we heard that a mother had got pills for her 15-year-old daughter who was pregnant by an abusive boyfriend, one of the other stories in the three families, and had then taken the daughter to the GP after she'd had the abortion, and the bloody GP had phoned the cops on her. The law here in the north of Ireland actually, like, it puts a duty on anybody who knows of a crime being committed for which the sentence is more than 10 years. If you don't report that crime, it's a troubles-related thing. If you don't report that crime, you're likely to prison up to 5 years for yourself. So the GP reported her, and this poor woman was up on charges of, like, helping her daughter. That's what the charge was. Somebody who here, like in the UK, in Britain, would be being told that it, you know, even if she was anti-abortion, would probably be being told it was in the best interest of her daughter to allow the daughter to have an abortion. Anyway, you can imagine that kind of weaponizing of 100 and at that stage 160-year-old law really mobilized people. We took to the streets in like, we used to take to the streets in hundreds. We were getting to about 1,000, and then the prosecution started, and all of a sudden we were like loads of thousands on the streets, because people just couldn't believe it, that they were actually doing this, that they were criminalizing people. We had protests outside of police stations, we had open letters. I won't go into it, but we had 2 open letters altogether. One that was signed by 100, mainly women, saying that they'd either use the pills themselves or to help somebody else to get them. After the mother was prosecuted, we had a further letter which was signed by 200 women and men saying that we had either used the pills ourselves, or if we were too old, like some of us, that we helped somebody else to get them, and saying, prosecute us. Don't prosecute these isolated individuals. We're responsible. We're the people who've been spreading the word about these pills. Prosecute us. Of course they didn't. But all of that really lent a huge impetus to campaigning here in the north of Ireland. And then the biggest thing, the most important thing that happened in terms of the change of the law here in the north, it didn't happen in Westminster, it happened in Dublin. And that was the repeal referendum. Because when 4 years ago now, around this time, I mean, I think it's actually on the 24th, the referendum happened on the 24th of May 2017. And on the 25th, actually on the 9th and 24th, we discovered that 2/3, 66.4% of Irish people had voted to legalise abortion, and to legalise it knowing that that was going to be abortion on request up to 12 weeks. Admittedly, much more difficult afterwards, and we can talk about that because that law is going to be reviewed this year. But as soon as that happened, there was a complete change in how abortion was approached here in the North. Both of the main nationalist parties, Sinn Féin and the SDLP, which up until then had sat on the fence so much that they must have had splinters everywhere, they suddenly became pro-choice. Actually, well, the SDLP hasn't become pro-choice, it's taken a conscience position, but with this leadership saying, you know, we are mainly pro-choice. Even some of the unionist parties started to kind of mutter about the need to change the law on abortion. So yes, in the end, it was Westminster who brought about the legal change, but really that was only because of the campaigning north and south, and I would actually say mainly from the south, believe it or not, that really made the difference. And I'll sort of shut up there, but just to say that we now have a situation in the north of Ireland where abortion is legal, a better law than you have in Britain, in England, Scotland or Wales on paper, but in reality we only have abortion available up to 10 weeks through early medical abortion, and that service is being provided by doctors who are basically doing it on top of their other jobs, because those services aren't funded. It's just doctors who have a conscientious commitment to providing abortion who are actually providing it. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much indeed, Goretti. That was incredibly informative, and I was particularly impressed, if I may say so, by the fact that it was in mass movements and collective activity that really got things on the go, and of course what happened in the south of Ireland. Now, Eileen, back to you.
I mean, it's very hard to come back after that, because of course it makes our battles seem really almost trivial. Actually, in the chat, I have put in the chat what the present campaigning issues for abortion rights Scotland are. You'll notice that can everybody see the chat? I'll quickly go down it, but it's there in the chat if you want it. Firstly, we're campaigning about access. We want a comprehensive local service and an end to the postcode lottery. It does make a difference where you are in Scotland. If you're in Edinburgh or Aberdeen, for instance, you will have a relatively easy time. If you're out in the rural areas, it's just hard geographically. Glasgow has, some of the problems that Glasgow has. There is a lot more anti-activity in Glasgow, and some of you may have heard about what a very Christian right organization that has actually been trying to give pills between the two early pills to stop abortion. I think it only happens in Glasgow. There doesn't seem to be any sign of it anywhere else in Scotland at the moment, but it's a very worrying development. So a comprehensive local service, both from the point of view of the healthcare and from the point of view of general attitudes. We want to continue medical abortion at home, the so-called telemedicine, but again, only for those who want it. For those women and others who want it, anybody who actually wants to go and consult a doctor or a nurse should be able to do so if possible. So it shouldn't be sometimes health services like it because it's a cheap option. It should be an option of choice. And all of this should be part of a comprehensive sexual and reproductive health service. We think it all should go together, like it does, as I said. Those of you that know the Chalmers Clinic in Edinburgh, those of you that are Edinburgh-based know that Chalmers Clinic offers a very comprehensive service in all areas of sexual and reproductive health. But outside Chalmers, and this brings us on to B, some days there is an anti-abortion picket or protest. So there is a campaign in Scotland about buffer zones. We want buffer zones around clinics so the anti-choicers cannot harass people as they actually enter the clinic, which does happen occasionally now. I know there are some people here have actually joined the pickets outside Chalmers. While we were on COVID, one of the things they did has probably taken a leaf from our campaigns. They were shining lights on Chalmers Clinic, Save the Unborn Child. Yeah, so definitely there's a very active buffer zone campaign in Scotland for anybody who wants to get involved in that. Decriminalisation, basically, that's always been the sort of the core thing. There should be no legal restrictions on abortion at all. All this signing off and have you done this and have you done that, it shouldn't be part of it. It should the thing is a health decision, and in most circumstances it can be a nurse or midwife health-led service. In fact, as a nurse or midwife health service, it is probably better. Many nurses and midwives are probably, you know, they have that deep training that in reproductive health that actually makes them very, very good supporters. And I'm not putting down the doctors either. Of course, there are some excellent sexual health doctors too, but it shouldn't have to be two doctors. Nurses and midwives can actually lead early, particularly early abortion services. And why? Well, we basically support the right to choose. It's a life event. The person that's pregnant should have the choice of what they do with that life event, and it should be done in an efficient and compassionate manner.
Eileen.